At its peak in the 1960s, the pop art movement had a great influence in the art world, from the US, the UK, Latin America, Japan, and throughout Europe. By loosely referring to various avant-garde movements such as Dadaism, Expressionism, and Surrealism, and by combining materials from different media, advertisements, comics, film, newspapers, photography, and poster art, artists introduced new ideas and concepts to the fine art space. The pop art movement was known for challenging the status quo. Pop art as a whole represented a rebellion against a rigid set of artistic conventions and borrowed from the use of existing imagery, symbols of mass culture. Pop art emerged as an intrinsic response to then-dominant abstract expressionism. Pop artists wanted to challenge tradition and the old way of thinking about art. The goal of pop art was to bring art closer to the general public, to create art with elements known to everyone. The movement could be characterized by its unique approach with messaging. It included humor, irony, and sarcasm, which was often directed towards subjects of interest. Its artists were taking inspiration from sources in popular and commercial culture. Pop art is based on the discovery that fine art and popular culture are free to emulate and even borrow outright from one another. Drawing on accessible imagery and mass-produced consumer products, pop art was a reflection of American culture at the time. It was a controversial notion to present everyday, ordinary imagery as fine art. Could a simple rendering of a familiar object be considered a great work of art? Could a unique pop art style presentation of a common item have an impact on a perspective and allow one to see the world in a different way? This presentation will focus on one of pop art's most influential figures, American artist Roy Lichtenstein. Born on October 27, 1923 in New York City, Lichtenstein showed artistic and musical ability in his early years. In 1945, he was drafted to the war where he continued to remain connected to his passion. He sketched throughout his time in Europe. Upon his return to the U.S. in 1946, he pursued a formal art education, obtaining a BFA and a master's degree. During the 1960s, along with the likes of Andy Warhol, Jasper Johns, and James Rosenquist, he became a leading figure in the new pop art movement. His work defined the premise of pop art through parody. He placed emphasis on methods of mechanical reproduction, particularly through his signature use of Ben-Day dots. Inspired by the comic strip and popular advertising, Lichtenstein produced precise compositions that documented while they parodied. He highlighted that one of the central lessons of pop art is that all forms of communication, all messages, are filtered through codes or languages. He argued that high art and popular art were no different. Both rely on code. Wham! And Drowning Girl are generally regarded as Lichtenstein's most famous works. His most expensive piece is Masterpiece, which sold for $165 million in January 2017. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, increased factory production and economic prosperity in the U.S. contributed to a rise in consumer culture dominated by recognizable product brands and iconic advertising images, popularized through mass media. The widespread appeal of products like Coca-Cola suggested an ideal of American democracy where individuals shared common experiences, regardless of class or social difference. By imitating the style and commercial technique of mass advertising, pop art embraced the mainstream understandings of mass consumption in everyday life. Using a twist on Descartes' axiom, "I consume, therefore I am," became a pop mantra. I will be providing an analysis on Lichtenstein's well-known piece Wham!, which was created in 1963. This time period in U.S. history was rich with controversial philosophies in art, politics, and societal norms. Wham! Is a piece that reflects a true essence of pop art in that it tackles the notion of war, a highly emotional topic, in a disconnected manner and creates a statement by coupling the use of comic book art sensibility with the dramatic intensity of serious subject matter. Lichtenstein uses his signature techniques, Ben-Day dots, and primary unmixed color to create the composition. It is a diptych painted with magna acrylic and oil on canvas, which measures 68 by 160 inches, 2 canvases that are each 68 by 80. The work's composition is taken from a panel drawn by Irv Novick, which appeared in issue number 89 of All-American Men of War, published by DC Comics in February 1962. He set out his first visualization of the painting, including marking the divide of the original single panel into 2 parts. To make the final painting, Lichtenstein drew around the projection of his preparatory study in pencil before applying the Ben-Day dots. This application involved using a homemade aluminum mesh and pushing oil paint through the mesh with a small brush. He then painted the thick outlines of the shapes and areas of solid color in acrylic resin paint. One would imagine that the techniques applied would have created a unique texture on the canvas that would have complemented its size and added to the experience of the observer. In the Wham composition, the artist uses linear geometric diagonal lines throughout to emphasize the dynamic action occurring in the piece. The positioning of the plane in large proportion on the left canvas allows the viewer to experience somewhat of a first-person perspective as a missile is launched through the sky. The use of perspective creates a sense of realism that is a clear contrast to the imaginary comic book world displayed on the canvas. The trail of the missile draws the eye successfully to the canvas on the right, which captures the viewer's eye with a large explosion. The 2 separate canvases, the use of dark black painted outlines and framing, crisp geometric images, and bright coloration each mimic traditional comic strip art. The iconography of the piece portrays the stereotypical war hero attacking the enemy. From start to finish, the diptych took 1 month to produce. While Lichtenstein's work generally originates with pre-existing popular imagery from advertising and cartoons, the artist himself acknowledged that the act of producing the art is really one of transformation. By taking the comic strip and using it as he does, he conflates the powerful but so-called low mass-produced commercial image with the traditionally venerated medium of large-scale easel painting. Lichtenstein explained the significance of the military subject matter he chose for many of his paintings in the early 1960s. At the time, he was interested in anything that could be used as a subject that was emotionally strong, usually love, war, or something that was highly charged. Also, he wanted the subject matter to be opposite to the removed and deliberate painting techniques. He saw the style of cartoons with their simple lines and primary colors as an appropriate vehicle for painting a dramatic scene in a detached, calculated manner. Although the intention of the original publication of the comic may have been to show heroic, action-filled images of all-American men of war, through Lichtenstein's satiric treatment, it may be interpreted that the comic scene on canvas is criticizing war rather than glorifying it. Wham exemplifies Lichtenstein's mechanical approach to storytelling through art and is arguably one of the most impactful art pieces of its time. The pop art movement introduced a controversial notion that presented everyday, ordinary imagery as fine art. Could a simple rendering of a familiar object be considered a great work of art? Could a unique pop art style presentation of a common item have an impact on perspective and allow one to see the world in a different way? As I conclude this project, I would answer yes. Seeing a particular image transported from the mass media to the form of fine art is followed by the realization that it is not the same image anymore. It has effectively been transformed, just as the pop art movement transformed the landscape of artistic expression. The works produced during the pop art era are showcased in art museums all over the world and are regarded as masterpieces, but many are also part of mainstream popular culture. In the present day, many are familiar images. The pieces have often been reproduced through a variety of media applications and integrated into contemporary memory. This is clear evidence of the overarching impact that the pop art movement had on society.